When you first were told that you had PTSD, how did that land for you? How did you process it? I think a lot of guys have deep trauma. I have family members that were in the military and they currently, experience panic attacks and a lot of the symptoms, but they don't want to normalize needing help. They'll go to the VA, they'll kind of get the medicine, but it seems like you took a different route in both processing it and treating it.
Well, I mean, they didn't even have those terms back when I was I mean, that was quite a while later in my life, but I mean, it was embarrassing. That's how I truly felt about it. It was embarrassing. Yeah, because I hadn't gone to Vietnam, and yet I was still completely at the effect of all this, crap that was going on. I mean, the disillusion of what our country was about, the disillusion of what the military was about, knowing that we were killing people. I mean, hearing stories about the rapes and the murders and and these are being told to me by the guys who think it's cool that they did it. And I'm sitting there trying to hold that without reacting in some unmarine sort of way. But, it's really, PTSD, for me, it was all really right after I got out of the Marine Corps. For the next several years, I was a complete mess. I had no sense of direction, no sense of who I was, no sense of where I was going in my life. Had been married and had two boys, right out of the Marine Corps. I'd have to acknowledge that those were kind of accidental. So, when I lost that marriage, I lost custody of my sons. I remember driving into a gas station in Costa Mesa, California, near my house at that time, and pulled up. And that's when service guys still came out to the car to help. And this guy comes out, and he's just kind of a crumpled young man. And I just stood there in awe, recognizing that he was this kid that I literally went in the Marine Corps with. He was from Pasadena, real good looking, great guy, easygoing. And here he was, 2, 3 years later, just decimated. I mean, he looked up and saw it was me, and we recognized each other, but the level of discomfort was just terrible. He's the one that told me how many we had lost over there. I didn't even know how to handle that. I literally drove off from that, just having to shut that off and run away from it. So PTSD is something that, for me, it turned into a chemical imbalance. That I became very suicidal. I attempted suicide, and that really was my moment of awakening. In that moment of suicide, it's weird as it sounds, I was thrusting a large hunting knife in my heart in the middle of the woods with complete, you know, determination that was going to end it. And all of a sudden I dissolved in this white ball of light that just permeated my being. There was no body, there was no woods around me, there was no nothing. And, this is not something at that age I had any concept of, but I was just saturated with the oneness of the universe, the perfection of the universe, and that life does matter. I don't know how long that moment was, but that's the moment really that defined the rest of my life. I'm so grateful that all of the terrible things that happened to me led to that moment, because it gave me a direction in life. And that direction was to reconnect with that, to discover how I could recreate that moment in various ways. And through meditation and whatnot, I was able to, but it also gave me a much deeper understanding. I could have been successful. I could have sold commercial real estate for Coldwell Banker or something, but success without self-awareness just really becomes a trap. And I see it in my clients all the time. We do, as men, we do the right thing externally, our career, family, reputation, or whatever, but it doesn't feel quite connected, and we're kind of numb. If I would have gone that way, and a lot of people do, I would have been with them. But most men, we're trained to push through it and not go within. And that's really the huge shift that was made in that moment of my life. Instead of looking outside of myself at what all the problems were and where I might find solutions, I started that inner journey. And that that makes all the difference in the world. That next level of success isn't more effort. It's really becoming more conscious. And that's really been my
Wow. So succinctly and wisely put. And I'd like to touch on how we deal with pain as men. I think your experience seems transcendental and crazy, a big ball of light. But transparently, I've had something similar in a spiritual sense. When you talk to people about it, it's weird. It's like the most true thing that could ever be true, and yet it's the most unexplainable thing in a way. But obviously hearing you say it, I know it's real. Like, I can tell it was real. And, I think a lot of guys out there have a lot of deep pain. And the more extreme would be, PTSD. But the suicidal ideation is very common among men. I mean, I think we both know the stats, sadly too well. And a lot of that desire to not live obviously comes from a myriad of reasons, but ultimately I think it could all be distilled down to whatever felt sense of pain or suffering is going on is too unbearable to live with. And I'm wondering, thinking about your experience and what led you to change into healing and now working with men, what would you say to someone out there who's having some of those thoughts and ideations?
I think the trap is we think emotional mastery is strength. We think by being able to deny what we're feeling is a strength and a manly sort of thing to do. And we think sensitivity is something to be avoided, and that's, something that women do and kids do or something like that, but unprocessed emotion doesn't disappear. It drives our behavior from the shadows. It really does. And, that suppressed emotion shows up in anger and control and withdrawal and exhaustion and physical just being worn down. And mature masculinity isn't stoic, it's self-regulated and present. For me, being a man means that I have control of my mind. I have awareness and control of my emotions, not control in the sense that I deny them, but control that when they come up, I breathe into them and explore them and heal them so that I can move forward and continue to evolve in my life. You know, the strongest men that I know are the ones who can feel without being ruled by that feeling. They're not afraid. That's emotional intelligence. And most men are living that old wiring and not the current reality where you get to be all of who you are and continue to evolve and discover all that you're capable of and create the life that you want.
Tell me about following your father's path into the Marines and ending up in Vietnam. You lost 60 men in your platoon. What did that level of loss do to your understanding of what it means to be a man, grief, some of those really light subjects?
Yeah. Well, growing up, I was conceived about a year or two after my dad got back from, South Pacific. And so we had all sorts of, you know, memorabilia around the basement, which is where my basement was, or my bedroom was, at least after 9 years old. And so I was just sort of raised in that. And Superman and all the heroes were part of it. And you just felt like, the United States was this amazing country, and you just buy into all of it because it's wonderful and true. So, I kind of carried that into when I was 18. I was a national rowing champion, and I had the cute girlfriend, and so I was like, yeah, okay, we got it. We know what we're doing. And then I went in the Marine Corps, and one morning on the rifle range. For me, the Marine Corps was just another sporting event. Just didn't really, my little 18, 19-year-old mind didn't really understand what I was getting into. But on the target range, rifle range, they threw up a human silhouette rather than the traditional target, the bullseye target. Somewhere that just hit me on the depth of who I truly am. And I literally, without thinking, stood up, threw my rifle in the mud, knew that I was never going to move forward with this. And of course, my drill instructor didn't care for that action too fully, jumping on my back and torturing me for the next several days to bring me back into alignment with what they needed and wanted of me. But the truth was, it was too late. saw that what I was not a good athlete. I was a man being trained to kill other people or to be killed. And neither one of those sounded at all interesting to me. So I played the game and went through. I actually didn't go to Vietnam, and because I got out on a medical discharge after a year. So it was just listening to all the terrible stories from the guys coming back, having lost so many close friends over there. And it was just a culmination, that resulted in later what was identified as PTSD. It didn't make any sense to me, even years later, but they said, yeah, no, that's exactly what you had. And yes, I was a sensitive guy in many ways, but I was also a guy who'd been raised in the woods and childhood running around in the woods and everything. So there was this big division of who I thought I was, and then having to discover, having to let go of everything that I'd been taught, everything, all the influences that had led me to that place, to really reframe what my life was about, what my values were, where I wanted to go in life. And that took me down the path of self-discovery. And it's a path that I not only am still on, but I'm guiding others on and fully enjoy. And it's a path that's allowed me to recognize who I am, what my values are, allowing me to become a confident, authentic person rather than some model of who my parents wanted me to be or thought I should be to fit into society.
Yeah, that's really well said. It's a common journey I think many of us men go on, having a view of what it means to be a man, what's worth giving our time to. And it seems like that moment where you threw your gun in the mud was this first realization that your values were not aligned and that the reality of what that situation called for violated some part of you. And while you didn't know what was next, it seems like you certainly knew this wasn't for you. And then on top of that, to have those relationships that you had built during the military, and while you didn't go to Vietnam, to have guys who did unfortunately either not come back or come back and to be in rough shape, that PTSD based on, the indirect exposure to trauma. I'm wondering, what are some practical tips or things that guys can do to start to acknowledge the pain and to start to heal it?
I think it's important to understand that our nervous systems are shaped very early in our life. You know, when I was growing up, acknowledging that, as a male, being afraid was just not something that you did. And I quite honestly don't remember ever being afraid when I was a kid. And it's not because I wasn't afraid, it's because that was so unacceptable that I hid it away. And in my particular family, I think probably due to my dad coming home from the war and my mom's rough childhood, anger wasn't acceptable. So I grew up in a family where, okay, stuff your fear, stuff your anger. Well, I'm really not supposed to feel hurt because that's kind of soft, so I'll stuff that one too. And shame, well, that's so far away. I'm not even going to look at that. I can't talk to anybody about that one. And so I just buried all of that emotions and all of that, buried those in what I would call my inner cave. Those protected me. Now I found what part of myself I had to hide away so that I'd be accepted and loved initially in my family, but then with other people in grade school or other levels of education or whatever. And the challenge with that is determines literally how fully you can breathe. That determines how fully you get to know who you are, and all of those things that I did to protect myself later on become things that really sabotage my life, quite literally. If I'm trying to be a perfectionist as a child so that I do everything right and get accepted, well, that perfectionism will sabotage me later in life. If I, whatever it was, whatever I did to protect myself, and that's true for everybody. You have to go on an inner journey where you're becoming more self-aware. You have to go on an inner journey where you're using that greater awareness of yourself to really recognize your feelings, your emotions, and begin to reparent that inner child quite literally, and in that repatterning, of your emotions, taking them from the subconscious that's running your life to the conscious where you can heal them to the, and in that healing, becoming more aware, becoming more conscious. Consciousness really determines your life. Your level of consciousness determines how you see, experience, and react to everything that comes into your life. And if you've got an emotional backlog, you can't be very conscious because you're not even aware and conscious of yourself. So you really can't be, compassionate with others. You can't be empathetic with yourself and others. You just don't take care of yourself in the level that you need to. And that mirrors itself into your relationship with others. So you need to go through awareness and to repattern into integration with all those parts and bringing them into the whole of who you are, to have the freedom to be the conscious person and create the life that you're capable of having. You don't need fixing, you need updating, you need to evolve.
You've said that men constantly look outside of themselves for resolutions when the external challenges are just reflections of internal ones that they haven't faced. So, walk me through what that process of awareness actually looks like when you sit down with a guy who's either blaming or over identifying with external circumstances and helping them move inward.
Well, I would say 80% of the people who get on a call with me, a discovery call, they begin by telling me all the outer challenges that they're having and and the outer things that they've tried to do to resolve those challenges. And that's a normal pattern. I'm not saying that's a good pattern, it's a normal pattern. And I think what attracts people to working with me is because I then take all of what they've shared and go, well, when did you first start feeling that? And they begin to look, or how often do you feel that? And then, how frequent in your life have you felt that? And those questions take them to looking inside. And that's the first time oftentimes that they've done that. And they begin to go, yeah, I've been dealing with this all my life off and on. Been at the effect of it off and on throughout my life and being limited by it. And it's like, well, when did it first start? Oh, well, geez, it's been happening since I was a kid. Gee, that's surprising. So as they recognize that this pattern of and what's limiting their life, what's sabotaging their life has been with them since they were a child, then they begin to get curious. It's like, well, if what do you need to do? I oftentimes just ask them straight out. It's like, well, what does a child want more than anything else? And everybody knows, and they respond, love. Well, do you want, conditional or unconditional love? Everybody knows unconditional love. Well, if you want unconditional love more than anything else as a child, what are you going to do to get it? And everybody goes, well, whatever it takes. Yeah. And that's exactly what you did, whatever it took. Whatever parts of yourself you didn't feel were acceptable, you hid away in that inner cave. Whatever parts you thought were getting you more accolades and recognition and acceptance and connection with others, you played out. And that's usually your left brain, your logical brain, your athleticism perhaps, or whatever skills you had. And those got you through life. They'll get you to a certain point. But all of a sudden, that's not enough anymore. That left brain, logical brain will get you into the right schools and get you the right job, but it won't get you into those next levels of evolution that you're interested in moving into. Well, it's tough to be a conscious CEO. You might be a CEO and do the old top-down controlling style of leadership, but you feel like there's something missing. You're not enough. You're not living up to your full potential. All of those things that come up for people. All those things that we feel aren't masculine are exactly what we need. All those parts of us that we hid away are the parts that we need to reconnect with and heal and integrate into our life so that we become a confident, integrated, whole, authentic human being. Because it's the key to that. I'm not, I would do anything to avoid having to do the journey of healing the inner child, the hero's journey. That's, it's difficult, hard, it's scary. It's not really once you get into it, but to step into it, it is. But what you have to do is neurologically rewire your brain. And to neurologically rewire your brain, you have to quiet the mind. And it's all those subconscious thoughts. We're only aware of about 10% of our thoughts. The other 90% of subconscious thoughts are rattling around and they're controlling and running our life. And so we have to become aware of those subconscious and make them conscious and heal them so that our mind quiets, so that in that quieter mind, that right brain and left brain begin to work together. The right brain being more emotionally aware, spontaneous, bigger picture. Left brain being more logical, linear, and trying to figure things out. But imagine trying to figure things out with a limited perspective and limited big picture of life. But it's also, as your mind gets quieter, that forebrain begins to develop into the conscious CEO of your life rather than the amygdala, which is the emotional center running your life. You become less reactive and more responsive to people. And so all of a sudden you become safer to be around. You become more cooperate, everybody starts cooperating more, collaborating more. All of a sudden your organization begins to be more productive and profitable, and I see it every time, so it makes I would have to say, I'll take a couple of steps back. When people start this inner journey and they start to reconnect with themselves, they really start looking for, instead of looking outside of themselves that they've done all of their life, using that old program for getting love that worked as a child, they begin to look within. And as they accept and fall in love with themselves, that, our relationship with ourselves is mirrored in our relationship with others. So as we fall in love with ourselves, then all of a sudden our children, our spouses, everybody starts feeling safer and more connected. And it just changes your entire life, and it's just a journey of becoming you, becoming self-aware and becoming more conscious and gaining control over your mind rather than having your mind, the subconscious parts of your mind run you. You become more intuitive, you become more creative, you become capable of handling the rapid change and increased complexity in today's business world. So you become more successful.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking it's so simple and it feels silly to go back and heal the inner child. I think a lot of men, when they hear that kind of language or that process, I think I often hear like, what's the point? That was no big deal. How is that really going to change anything? Even if I go back and heal that, it doesn't mean things will get better present day. Uh, and all those questions are valid. But the reality is we both know it works. And that is the way forward, is to go backward in a sense. I'm curious, why do you think guys are so resistant to doing that? It just seems like we hold on to dear life until it damn near kills us, until we really reach the end, then we'll try anything? And I just think like that's we don't want to wait till that point happens. How can we get guys to realize and name the resistance but not normalize it?
Yeah, and that is a sad part that you're mentioning. I mean, when I work with a lot of guys in their 50s and 60s, and a comment that I frequently hear is, "Why did I have to wait this long to figure out and find out who I am?" It's like, well, you didn't have to. I mean, in my work, that the deeper inner child healing only takes a couple of months. I mean, and it really gives them the foundation they need to then build their life on. But doesn't mean other things won't come up, but they have the tools, they have the ability, they have the awareness to handle whatever's coming up next. And for me, emotions are nothing but indicators that there's something ready to be healed. So I don't push away like most do. I embrace it. It's like, oh, I'm feeling angry, or I'm feeling frightened. I'm going to breathe and get curious. I'm going to breathe and take a look at, well, what's that emotion about? Oh, that's around this. And oh, well, I can heal that. And then let it go. So I'm always healing. I'm always evolving. I'm always becoming more and more what I'm capable of being. And so, the whole trap of staying stuck where you were when you were 3 years old, being caught in that web of your emotional reliance on what worked to take care of you as a child, that should be what's scary. Because if you're not in control of your mind, you're not in control of your life. And you can't be in control of your mind if you don't go on that hero's journey. It's one of my mentors was Joseph Campbell. He wrote that whole book on the hero's journey. So it's a big part. That inner cave, he has a quote of, "You've got to enter that cave within that you fear to enter to discover the treasures that you seek." And that treasure that you're seeking, of course, is yourself. It's that unconditional love that you wanted as a child, and you discover, "Oh, the only person that can give that to me is myself." Do you have the courage to love yourself unconditionally so you can create relationships that are more involved, committed, and loving and supportive for everybody, including yourself, your family, and those around you? That's the question you have to ask. It's only scary. I remember when I was in a workshop and I was like Mr. Spiritual in my 20s, and the woman, they were the couple in charge, and I ended up working with them for years, co-creating with them. The guy was John Gray, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, and his wife at the time. And I remember Barbara was called me out. She said, "And Ron, your anger, what about that?" And I'm like, "What anger? I don't have any anger." I mean, I literally didn't feel like I did. But as she pushed a few buttons as the day went on, I began to recognize, no, I got some serious anger. In fact, I got so much anger that I'm afraid if I let it out, I'll destroy this building. I realized that wasn't physically likely, but it felt very real to me. The irony is when it came out, it was hardly anything. But I was so frightened of being angry because of the family training that I'd gone through that my fear of anger made me terrified of even looking at that. And yet, once it came out, it was just this little peep relative to what I thought it was going to be. And it was like taking a lid off something that allowed me to be me. So what we're afraid of is being ourselves. Maybe that's the thing we're really afraid of. Wow, if I have to acknowledge and heal and become myself, then I have to be responsible for my life. I can't use all these excuses that I've gotten away with. But yeah, I know that that's the work. To become a conscious, successful leader, you've got to have that foundation to build on. To become a person who's creating you're not just passing along all your emotional backlog to your kids. You've got to heal that and be raising them from a place of unconditional love rather than trying to mold them into what you think they should be. I know the work that I do helps men become the kind of have the presence that others naturally follow and feel safe around. And that makes all the difference, both in your family and with others.
Yeah, it brings up for me one of my favorite quotes is from an author, Jim Finley, and he says, the lie that we believe is if people knew the real me, I wouldn't be loved or accepted. And I think it's what you're getting at there, which is such a low sense of self worth many of us men have because, as you're saying, when we were kids, the proper love and acceptance wasn't validated or reflected. And there's attachment theory and gets into all that as well and how it's expressed. But essentially, then we grow up with this very low sense of self worth. And to your point about not expressing the anger, we're really good about disassociating from the realities of ourself within them. We're aware of them, but we don't get in touch with them. Because if we got in touch with them, it means we have to deal with them, like you're saying. That was so well put. And then we just essentially try to heal those parts of us, it seems like, through external validation. And there's this pattern that you've identified, which as children, think you were saying this earlier, we seek validations areas where we get approval. So obviously primarily from the parent, that's okay. If you make good grades, okay, then I'll try really hard to be smart, right? Or if you don't get angry, then I'll reward you. Whatever it is, we start subconsciously giving into that. And then of course at school, right? If we get bullied because we're a particular way, okay, I'm going to avoid being like that. Or if we get accepted in a certain way, oh, I'm able to sing or I'm able to make fun of others or use humor in a manipulative way, then I'll do that to make friends, whatever it is. All that said, that validation as children gets embedded in us as the only way to get approval. But to use your language, we sabotage ourselves then by continuing to seek that external validation instead of finding it inside. So when it comes to knowing that we need to find that love and acceptance for ourselves, what does that actually look like to move from that survival we have as kids to moving beyond those limits and actually finding the love and acceptance for ourselves?
Well, it looks wonderful. I mean, I just received 2 emails the other night. I was actually reading on my iPad before I went to bed, and I read both of them to my wife, and they were stories from guys about how their life has changed due to this work. And I mean, all I could say to her, I'm well past retirement age, and I have no desire to retire at all because it's such a privilege to be on this journey. I'm nothing but a guide, and I guide them on this inner journey. They don't need more information. They need space and guidance and their processes to reconnect with who they already are deep within themselves. And, so when a man does that, boy, everything else changes. Their leadership ability, their relationships, their purpose in life begins to realign naturally. When people first come to me, I often ask kind of what's your higher intention? And it's usually very self-oriented. I want to be a better parent. I want to make more money. I want to, whatever it might be, but it's very self-oriented. Even within a couple of months, as they begin to shift that old program for getting love, looking outside of themselves to looking within, they begin to recognize, oh, my highest intention is actually to, it's bigger picture, it's to create a better family, is to create a more conscious organization where everybody feels safe and working together in a more cooperative, collaborative ways and that kind of thing. And they want to affect, how can I help society? And yet, got a 9-month program that where I noticed by the end of that, they're looking really, what's my greatest aspiration? In other words, not what I can accomplish right now from where I am, but what do I need to breathe into? What do I need to heal? Who do I need to become to create that and have that level of effect in the world? I know mine is to create a more conscious and caring world. Well, I'm always recognizing I need to let go here. I need to develop there. I need to shift this. And so I'm evolving all the time. I think for a man, that is the most rewarding experience in the world because you're an adventure. Maybe that's just me, but I'm on this adventure of self-discovery, this adventure of understanding the world, this adventure of understanding what we're capable of, this adventure of making the world a better place because of my abilities of helping people move into more conscious leadership roles and that type of thing. That's what I do, because leaders, they not only have a great influence on their organization, they can have a big influence and a lasting influence on a societal level. And so that's why, that's my target audience. There's people who want to become those conscious leaders who are making the world a better place. But also in that, creating organizations that are more productive and making more money. I mean, becoming a conscious leader, literally, and there's like 50 years of research on this, shows that you're going to increase productivity and profits by at least 40 or 50%. And I've got people who've gone through this and doubled the value of their organizations within a year. Many within 5 years are doing things that are just incredible, not only rewarding to themselves, but, just they're creating organizations where everybody is benefiting and others are, seeing the results of that too. So, if you want to live a full life and have a clue of who you are and what you're capable of, then you need to, spend a couple months exploring, becoming more self-aware. That's all you're doing, and getting in touch with those parts of yourself that you need so that you can evolve and be capable of creating that life you want. That's the simple truth of it.
Yeah, it reminds me, I'm reading the book Iron John by Robert Bly. And in there, he talks about in the Renaissance time, I believe, in England for men, it was actually very common after they finish school to take a few years off to learn how to be lovers. So, for those who are listening, he's referencing the archetypes king, magician, warrior, lover that play out. These are mature masculine archetypes of particular facets of masculinity and how you express it. And he talks about how during this couple years off, the goal of the man was essentially what you're saying. It's to get in touch with himself through learning how to play a stringed instrument, committing yourself to a craft. it was writing poetry and learning to recite it by heart to a fair maiden who was, behind a window. And it was to be intentional about becoming more, but it was all out of the spirit of adventure that you're talking about. And I just think to myself, in the US, you go to high school and then you either go into the military, you go into the trades, or you go to college, all of which are, of course, perfectly fine and necessary paths as far as like common ones. But I do wonder, what would it look like if we introduced that fourth path of learning how to be a lover, going on the adventure, the hero's journey of just discovering ourselves. I think parents wouldn't allow that. They would think guys are just wasting their time, right? I think society would really think someone is a failure if they did that. And the reality is, going back to the profits and those things related to the businesses you talked about, we just have this broken mindset, right? That unless we push it all down and push forward, then we're not going to maximize our capitalistic type of framework. But I'm wondering if you have any testimonies of guys that you work with, maybe who are a little younger, who have taken that more lover's journey and taken the few years off, and what your sense of some of the outcomes that would come from that would be.
Well, the outcomes basically are they have a better relationship with themselves. And like I said earlier, that relationship with themselves determines what your relationship with others are like. You have a better sense of who you are and what you really value and the life that you truly want to create and the life that's worth creating for you. So all of a sudden, there's so we I'm very much into neurology and I'm very much into capability and I can let go of all the languaging about healing the inner child and all of that and just talk in those terms. It's like if we don't go on that journey that you're talking about, if we don't heal and really discover all those other parts of ourselves, we literally are never accessing the capabilities that our brain has. We, if we're coming from fight or fight place that most people are coming from throughout their life, that really communicates to the body that we're not safe. And so that changes our neurological system. It goes into, the parasympathetic and sympathetic are completely off balance. All of a sudden, we go more into our primal brain rather than higher levels of thinking. And we stay more left brain logical. And what I see consistently is the definition of control of so many people that I work with is, I pointed out to them and they recognize that it's not control, but to be in control, they have to stop breathing, stop feeling, shut down, and get into this logical position of fight or flight or freeze. And I'm going, does that really sound like a position of control? You know, because from my position, that sounds like a place of out of control. And they're going there, they're sitting there and it's like they've invested their entire life in this, this is what's real. This is what's important, is to be able to be in control. And they realize they're putting themselves completely out of control. So that's when they get curious. That's when they get willing to breathe and heal and to begin to access the parts of self that they need. All those parts that we hid away are the very parts that we need to evolve and grow into the person that we're capable of being. It's not like those are extras that somehow we need to discard and cut off from who we are. We need to integrate those. So I kind of lost your question. I apologize. But it's really, do you have the courage to become a whole, integrated, capable of human being who loves and accepts himself and is willing to create the life that they want? That's the only question. It's not about achieving. That achievement comes more naturally when you can access higher levels of thinking, quite naturally. you know? It's just, is it time for you to discover who you are and what you're capable of? That's the question. What level do you want to play?
Yeah, I resonate with that language of integrated and whole self, and those parts of us that were isolated. In my estimation, when you are overcompensating or projecting or over identifying with some external facet, whether it's a relationship or a situation, or some component, then that is a really good signal that that is a disintegrated part of you that needs to be integrated. Because I think your point is so true, and but yet so challenging, which is maybe the point of life isn't to get the girl, to earn the money, to, have all these traditional forms of success, but maybe it really is to gift yourself with the gift of wholeness. And one metric for me, and it seems like you emulate this very obviously in our conversation, is how at peace are you with the person that you are? Not that you accept all the parts as they are in the sense of final states. There are parts of us that need to change, but are you at peace with them as at least being acceptable and at least being lovable and at least having the potential to change? And, that's been a healthy metric for me, is any part of my life where I feel unsettled or uneasy, it's disintegrated. And also, I need to give that thing time to heal. And it really brings me to my last question, where you have an entire framework that you call the big mind, the integrated whole brain way of approaching life versus the limited rationalized way that most men operate. So, for guys listening who recognize they're stuck in their left brain, or that they're disintegrated, or that they're compartmentalizing, what's that bridge into a fuller way of thinking and being?
Well, it's really everything we've been talking about, to be quite honest with you, but it's the willingness. Yeah, I guess I can only tell you a story that comes up for me. I just happened to speak to a guy 3 days ago. He's 65 now. He started working when he was 60. He had 5 nine-figure businesses when he came to me. The love of his life was leaving. His 2 adult sons were not connecting with him, and they were kinda, going their own way, and he was losing key people in his organizations. He was just felt like everything was falling apart. I mean, those are his words. And well, I'll even share it. He even said, I feel like I'm going to end up living under a bridge, which is not an uncommon thing to hear, but not for somebody who has millions and millions of dollars in the bank. He could buy the bridge and fix it up underneath. And talking with him now, every time that we did a lot of intense work for about a year, but then it's been just when he's in transition, or when he's working on something, or going through something with his business or in life, that he reaches out. And every time he reaches out, it's really a process of letting go. He's ready to let go of some old pattern, some old way of being. He's ready to let go and evolve into a deeper level of trust and a deeper level of connection with himself. Every time. I mean, sometimes I'll fly down to California and work with him for a few days. Sometimes we'll just be on the phone. It varies, but that's the art of life. The art of life is breathing and letting go, breathing and becoming. I it sounds very simple, but I've gotten to a place at my age. I mean, I'm 78 years old, and I know all I need to do is breathe and be curious, because that puts me in a state of being present, which allows me to be conscious enough to access higher levels of thinking that allow me to be able to resolve and heal, and with ease, anything that comes into my life, whether it's in business, personal, whatever it might be. And that, that's a level, and you're not giving up anything. I mean, I'm in a 36-year marriage that's the most incredible relationship I could ever imagine being in. I mean, 36 years later, we're madly in love with each other. I mean, that's certainly one of the most precious aspects of the work. But you also, I mean, opportunity comes. You're making the money. You're having the relationships. You're all of the things that you truly want are more acceptable, or accessible, I should say, from that place of more conscious, living more consciously. So there's no way to weigh the two, because living unconsciously, you're using alcohol to compensate. You're using other ways of not dealing with things that are shutting you down. And I see it. See people, the reward for retirement is you die within 2 years. All the research shows it. I mean, I hear guys talking about retirement all the time, like that's some big accomplishment. My little brother was 10 years younger than me. He retired, and yeah, I mean, he died 5 or 6 years ago now. He's 10 years younger than me, and he died at 62, I think, or something like that. And, leaving two great kids and their kids now, and his wife. And, he had this wonderful life that he just, because he didn't take care of himself, he left behind. And that's what happens with so many men. I mean, I have this broader perspective because I hear from so many people. But, yeah, you give your life over to being, you can't deal with it anymore. It becomes overwhelming. You're using alcohol to maintain, or overworking, or whatever your, fix is. And, and then it ends. At 78, I'm not bragging, I'm just saying it works because I'm as healthy as I mean, I go out and walk 18, holes of golf. I walk, 5 miles every day with my wife. I do all kinds of, I just remodeled the house. I'm just saying, if you really truly want to be a man, discover what your capabilities are. Access them rather than hiding them, rather than being afraid to discover who you are. Consider that your hero's journey, the biggest adventure you'll ever go on, because that's where you're going to access your full capability and find the success that you're truly worthy of.
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning that framework again, the hero's journey. And for anyone who doesn't know what we're talking about, please go look it up. The hero's journey, Joseph Campbell. I believe the book is Hero with a Thousand Faces, if I'm correct on that. But I think what it brings up with Miran is, first of all, gratitude for older guys like you that can show us younger guys a different way. I think when we, and I imagine you felt this way when you were in your 20s and 30s, but you don't have the foresight to see down the road. You just live in the moment. You just think like, this is what I have. And it could be really meaningful things. I even find myself now, I have a 20-month-old and we're due with our second in a couple weeks. And, it's like my life is so full on right now. I don't have a lot of foresight to think about my 60s, but you share these stories of the guys that you work with. That's like, you know, we got to do the work now. We got to be conscious of where we're heading and knowing who we're becoming, because we are becoming someone. And, I will give you props. I think you're that healthy archetype. It's like the CEO guy or someone like your brothers, that path or the path that you've taken. And it's not that you were better than them. It's just that, to your point about the radical, simple concept of consciousness, you were just aware and you just took each step that led to a more full and whole and loving life. And that ends up in that manner. And I think for any guy listening when you're young, it's just really a call to say, yes, it's important to figure out life partnership and career and saving and thinking about your future. And when you think about your future, think about the type of person you want to become and know you're magically not going to be that. It's day in and day out, certain steps that's going to lead you in those paths. And all that said, Ron, I'm just really thankful for the path that you've taken and the wisdom that you've been able to give us by walking it.
Yeah, there's one thing, and from what you were sharing, I just want to mention, and that is all the stuff that you don't heal within yourself, you pass along to your kids. It's this emotional family tree. And I mean, it's, with epigenetics and everything else we're understanding these days, you literally, do you want to pass all that stuff along to your kids, or do you want to heal that so that they can grow up and really know who they are and what they're capable of? Yeah.
Yeah. One of my favorite quotes, Father Richard Rohr, he says, "What you don't transform, you transmit." And I think that sums up a bit of what you're getting at there. And, I certainly feel it with my own shortcomings present day. It's just like, man, even though my kids aren't old enough to really like consciously see that I struggle with that, do I want to a day to arrive where they do? And, I think to your point, there's really only two options. You heal it, you move on in good conscience, you don't pass it on, or you let it fester and linger, you avoid it and you do. But I think this false mindset that that shortcoming or that unhealed self, let's say, on a deeper level is can just happen and there be no repercussions. I mean, that's just not true. So I think your message is hitting home personally, and it's something that I hope guys can take away with. And yeah, I'm curious, where can people find your work?
I would just go to my website, ronstotts.com, ronstotts.com. And, there's some materials that are free that they can download to begin that inner journey. There's all sorts of information so they can begin to understand it more fully. And of course, my programs and whatnot are on there also. But yeah, it's, folks like yourself and others who are trying to help men and society shift. It's what's necessary. Whatever we see is going on in the world, if we really want to change it, we have to change ourselves. It's just whatever's going on in the world is nothing but a reflection of that discord within ourselves. And so, you have to take responsibility and do the best you can for your little corner and maybe start affecting other people and affecting the world and raising kids who are, making a better world for everybody too. It's all up to us.
Well said, and the perfect note to end on. So thank you again for joining us today, Ron. And guys, until next time.
Thanks.